We think women need to talk more openly about money because money really matters. It shouldn't be embarrassing or confusing. Join the conversation. We'll be discussing a whole range of topics which will help you get comfortable with your finances. Money Matters. Brought to you by AJ Bell. Hi everyone, I'm Danni and this is the AJ Bell Money Matters podcast, which is packed full of tips on how to make the most of your money and hopefully live a fitter financial life. This week I've got Jenny with me. Hi Jenny.
Hi Danni, great to be here.
It is great to have you here. Just for all of our listeners who've maybe not heard from you before, I think it'd be great if you just maybe share 3 things about you.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So I bought a house, my first house last year with my husband. I have a couple of whippets who are my pride and joy. And I'm really into gardening. And all of those things, I suppose, kind of tie up house, dogs and gardening.
They certainly do, yes. So that sort of stage in your life. Here is a question for you. Since I'm getting personal, I'm going to ask more personal questions. Before you got married, did you get a prenup?
I didn't. No, it didn't really cross my mind. And actually, we recently celebrated our 3rd anniversary. So this podcast is quite timely, I think.
No, I didn't get a prenup either. It wasn't something that was talked about a lot. It just never entered my mind at all to even consider getting a prenup. But Eve, another member of our brilliant Money Matters team, who was on the pod a couple of episodes ago, was talking to me the other day about a book that is making lots of people, particularly in the United States, reconsider whether they need one. I'd not heard of the book before she mentioned it, but I've done the Google thing and it's making a huge splash, particularly on social media. It is called Strangers and it's written by a woman called Belle Burden, who is kind of like US royalty. She's part of the Vanderbilt family and I'd heard of them.
Oh, yeah, of course. It's they're kind of like, US royalty. They're all based in railroads and property a little while ago, right?
Exactly that, yes. Really glamorous lifestyle. Anyway, she got divorced. The breakup was sudden and nasty, and the prenup that she signed against the advice of her lawyers came back to bite her in the bum. And she had lots of cash. The divorce didn't exactly leave her broke, but her story really resonated with an awful lot of women in the US. And her story is actually now being turned into a Netflix series with Gwyneth Paltrow taking the lead role. But it has made a lot of people, as I say, start to question how they run their financial lives, how their relationship with money can change when they get married.
I'm not surprised because prenups have, like you said, become a big thing in the US in the past few years. And there's been some really interesting surveys carried out showing how popular they've become, especially amongst Gen Z and millennials. So according to a 2022 Harris poll, around 41% of engaged or married Gen Z adults have entered into a prenup, and almost half of engaged or married millennials. Which really, I don't know why I didn't think it would be something younger people would be interested in. But you know us, Danny, AJ Bell Money Matters, we're all about helping women feel good about their finances. And 52% of prenups are initiated by women.
Yeah, I don't know why I was surprised by those figures, because women have more wealth these days and they work more, they're more aware, more in touch with their finances. And, well, I guess some people might think, hey, I'm getting married, I don't want to jinx anything by even talking about a prenup. Just like making sure that you've got a will, having those conversations about your finances, it's a really good thing. And it occurred to me that I'm a parent of 2 girls, and one day I hope that I'll be able to help them out with a deposit for a house. And if they were to buy that house like I did with a partner, I would hope that if that partnership came to an end, that that deposit amount would return to my daughter and not be split 50-50. It was just really occurred to me when I was thinking about prenups. Actually, maybe I would tell my kids that they should get one.
Yeah, it's such a fair point. I think when you're getting engaged and you're organizing a wedding, it's so exciting and emotions are high. And we know from the episode with financial psychotherapist Vicky Raynor that money is quite often an emotional topic or things linked to money with couples. So I'm interested to understand how you approach the idea of a prenup without it getting, like you say, distrusting or overwhelming or adding negative emotions to something as lovely as love.
And I'm absolutely delighted that our guest this week can help us talk through the nitty gritty of prenups. Susie Barter is a partner at the family law firm Burgess Mee. Welcome, Susie.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, I suppose let's go to the basics. What is a prenup?
So a prenup is like a contract. It is a contract, but it's not strictly enforceable as a contract between two people about to get married who are looking to govern what might happen to their assets and their income if they get divorced, but also increasingly how they're going to manage their financial life together. So who might pay for what and what arrangements they might make, and agreeing in advance what assets belong to each of them and which they're going to share.
And is it just something that people with lots of cash and property, like Belle Burden that we were talking about earlier, should get? Or is it something that lots of people should get?
No, I think it's something that's increasingly common. And, in the last 6 months, my clients have ranged from a family wanting to protect £150,000 taken out of a family home to give to their daughter as a deposit, which for them was great wealth, to, hundreds of millions of pounds worth of property and businesses that we'd commonly associate with a prenup. So no, there's a wide range of things. There's usually people who have something that's precious that they want to protect, or simply want a life plan. They want to know what marriage is going to look like and how it might impact them.
Now, I mentioned some of the stats from the US earlier, but I'd be keen to understand what the landscape is like here in the UK. Are they becoming more popular?
Yes, definitely. I think there are many more prenups around than there were because they're being considered by many more people, and they're better known and I hope better understood. So yes, and with younger people. So not just younger people who are going to generate enormous amounts of family wealth, which has always been a common scenario, but people starting out in their careers, or people who are getting married later and have begun to build up some wealth and are used to financial independence, and they just want to know what marriage is going to look like. So yeah, there is a much wider range of people looking at them now.
And why do you think what are the top reasons why people get a prenup in your experience?
Often they are advised to by family members. So that's where there's gifting of family money, whether it's enormous generational wealth or, as I said, a deposit for the first flat. Their family are concerned that that money stays in the family. There's people who are about to have a stellar career, who are in the arts industry and their career is about to take off, or they've set up a business with a friend and they think it's going to do great and they want to protect the integrity of that business. And, in divorce, if a business is shared, it can really impact the future of the business, not only the value of it, but its ability to grow. So I think that there's just a wider appreciation. And there's, people read all the time, don't they, about divorce and the horror stories about what can happen and what they can lose. And I think there's a general interest, but also perhaps nervousness about that. And maybe a bit more of an acceptance that relationships might not be forever, despite your best intentions. So people come from more mixed families, less people get married, so less people think that it's a normal step in a relationship. They understand it to be a big step. So I think there's just an interest in what marriage looks like for that couple and what it might look like if they don't remain a couple.
It's really interesting that you talk about parents putting in a deposit for a flat or a house. I was talking to Jenny earlier about that's exactly something that I'm looking to do for my kids, and I would absolutely want that protected if things didn't work out the way that we all hope for their kids that it will. But when things go wrong, if people have a prenup, how do they use it? What happens?
Well, of course, in an ideal world, they implement it. So the prenup has been carefully thought out, carefully agreed between them. It's something that they are both committed to and feel fair, and it provides an answer. So at the end, when, the end of a relationship is hard, everyone knows you're suddenly looking at a whole different future, one that you hadn't perhaps been planning for. And it gives you a blueprint. It says, well, this is what's going to happen. And you know what's going to happen. So you don't have to fight about it, worry about it, argue about it, fear it. You just do what you have agreed, unless you don't want to. And that's when people challenge prenups. And then the integrity of the prenup can be considered by the court. And that's when you'd probably end up with lawyers, where one person is trying to escape from what they agreed, or more likely what they said they didn't really agree, but was pushed onto them. So yeah, in an ideal world, they're implemented and it gives you the answer to what the rest of the next step in your life looks like, or they're argued about.
Yes. Divorce. So I read a really interesting comment, which is, the person that you marry is not the same person that you divorce. People change and relationships change. And I suppose I'm interested in the common mistakes that people make when they think about a prenup. What are the sort of things that you're always surprised when people expect is a prenup, that it's all, locked and loaded? I mean, I certainly just assumed that once it's all done and dusted and you've got your prenup, that's it. It can't be challenged.
Well, I think that, at the moment, prenups are not enforceable as a contract. And so there are circumstances of the case. So our divorce law is discretionary. So the judge, if it ends up in court, will do what they think is just and reasonable in all the circumstances of the case. And there's a list of factors that they must consider. And prenup isn't one of those factors, but it is a circumstance of the case. So they're increasingly giving weight as the body of opinion in society moves towards thinking to consenting adults should be able to decide what happens in their own life. And if they're properly advised and if they know what they're doing and if they understand the impact, the likelihood is that the prenup will be used as a determinating factor. But if it's not entered into correctly, if it leaves one party destitute, if there was fraud at the time it was entered into, like any other contract, it can be undone. So I think a good prenup, carefully thought out, with proper advice, proper disclosure, entered into willingly, that's given proper thought to what might happen on divorce and what the court will be thinking about when making that decision, then you stand a really good chance of the prenup doing what it intended to do. So, we'll tell clients, if you enter into it properly, expect to be bound, but realize that it's not enforceable, full stop, as of right. So there is that element of uncertainty, but it's decreasing rapidly, and the law is looking to, make contracts enforceable, or make prenups enforceable as a contract. So we are moving towards that.
Now I'm going to ask a slightly selfish question, Susie. I got married a few years ago, and I think most people probably would have heard of prenups. Are there postnups that can be put together after a marriage, and do they differ?
They don't differ. I mean, they deal with exactly the same sorts of things. The reasons for them sometimes differ. So it might be that people hadn't realized they could get one. Often it will be money coming into a marriage. So again, an inheritance or the deposit for a bigger family home when people have children. There'll often be a stimulus for people suddenly thinking about it. But you could absolutely have a postnup It's the same considerations. It's the same pseudo contract basis. And you'd agree the same sort of things. What happens to our house? What are we going to live on? What happens to our income? What about inheritances? What's mine? What's yours? What do we want to be mine and yours? When are we going to share things? How are we going to share things? So all the sorts of conversations that you might have to plan your marriage and the financial health of your marriage can come into a prenup or a postnup.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a funny one, isn't it? Because I feel like talking about something post-marriage makes you feel like you're doubting or that there's uncertainty. But do you find that that prenups are just about wealth? And is it people who just have wealth that might need this? But I'm thinking about pensions and houses as well, where quite often in divorces the women will take the house and the man will take the pension. So just wondering if it's always all about wealth.
I mean, it's largely about wealth, because divorce is largely about splitting money. Well, not the divorce. There's all the emotional aspects. There's the real world aspects of getting divorced. But in terms of divorce law and financial settlements, it's largely about money. So yeah, they usually are about money, but it's not necessarily keeping all the money for yourself, or it might be how you share your money. It might be how you save. It will certainly look at in a prenup how a divorce might look, and a proper consideration of pensions and houses. And if there's children, will one person stay in the family home? Will money to the other person be delayed? I mean, there's 100 different scenarios, 1 million different scenarios we look at in prenups, because every single marriage is different. But absolutely, pensions are a valuable asset. Family home is often the most valuable asset. And then on top of that, you layer what other more wealthy families have. So we can look at anything in a prenup. But there's only, I mean, the biggest limit on when a prenup can be enforceable is whether the basic needs of the parties are met. So a prenup that says, well, I get everything and you get nothing, isn't going to be upheld in court. So, but a prenup that says, I invested more money in the house than you, and I'll make sure that you have a house, but I'm going to have a slightly bigger house because I invested more money, might be fine. Or I'm going to keep all of my inherited wealth, but we're going to make sure that you have a house and that you have enough income if you've compromised your career, that you will be okay, that there's some pension provision for you because all the pensions are in somebody else's name. They're an art, not a science, really, a good prenup. And so it is about creating a scenario that works for each individual family.
I like that. It's an art, not a science. That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
I also wanted to ask about petnups. So I joked to my husband that I paid £10 more than him for our first dog, and therefore I own 51% of our oldest pooch. But I've seen more on petnups on social media. Are you seeing more petnups, and what do they tend to look like?
No, I haven't, is the honest answer. Although I have had, that said, pets are very important to those of us who have them. And so I've spoken to several people over the last few years who are really concerned about who's going to get the dogs. And the sad answer is, at the moment, dogs are considered a chattel. So if whose name is the dog registered in, that's going to be quite determinative of ownership. But we had an arbitration, which is like a private court hearing, where, not a settlement hearing, but where our arbitrator can decide what happens. And in that last year, the only point that went to the arbitrator in the end was what happened to the family cat. And so if we say this cat was called Suki, we literally had Suki submissions, and they were the only submissions prepared by the barrister for the court. So I think, in divorces, there'll often be the elephant in the room. Everyone can agree everything apart from the dog or grandma's piano. There might be something that just tips somebody who is trying to be reasonable over the edge. And so, yes, I would say that if you care greatly about your dog, then have your dog registered in your name. And it would do no harm at all to have a little agreement that just says, look, if we separate, the dog comes with me. And, be the one that takes the dog to the vet. There were a couple of cases actually where judges did look a little at the care and welfare of the dog. So although there's not strictly the power for them to do so, they did, when making their decision about this chattel, look at the welfare of the dog. So, I don't think it's a big thing, but it is a thing. And, if you want certainty, it does no harm to discuss it and write it down.
Hugely emotional decisions. And of course, emotions are heightened when you're going through a period of divorce. So even if you don't go down the route of actually formally getting a prenup, just having those early discussions with your partner can help if things go wrong, but also it sort of sets the tone for the marriage, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's especially with my younger clients, the conversations, the sorts of questions that we ask, I think are really beneficial. Where are you going to live? Are you you might move abroad, you're going to have children, might one of you give up their job? If you're identifying differences, you can also work out how to manage your marriage to make things fair. So I had a client who signed a prenup, which I thought was, a little mean, but we had a chat. I gave her a list of things like, right, you need to remember that you need to be very careful about whose name houses are registered in going forward. You need to maintain your career. You need to don't give up everything. Don't move abroad and drop your career, because with this document that you've signed, you're going to lose your financial independence and you need it. So I think whether or not you have a prenup, the conversations that inform them are very useful conversations for people to be thinking about, which they might not otherwise think about. Does it matter if I invest my mum's inheritance in improving the family home? So it might matter, because if that money has become blurred with the matrimonial money, your ability to hive it back out again at the end of a marriage on divorce is greatly prejudiced. Whereas if you know that that might happen, then you might plan to fund an extension in a different way. And so I think they're very sensible discussions to have, and just to be aware of the impact of financial decisions that you are making during the marriage.
And we're obviously talking about finance. How much does a prenup cost?
Well, they can be from a few thousand to, hundreds of thousands. So where we have super wealthy clients with assets all over the world, then they might well want agreements that are enforceable in lots of different jurisdictions. So there'll be tax advice, and there'll be advice from lawyers in other jurisdictions. So they will get quite expensive. Although I had a very wealthy client and his prenup wasn't very expensive because it was very straightforward. We ensured that his future wife would have somewhere lovely to live and plenty of money to live on for the rest of her life. So, she was happy, he was happy. It wasn't complicated. They were UK based. But the costs vary greatly, but it's not something to underdo. I think make sure you have some proper advice and you really understand the implications, so that you can design something that will work, that's fair, and that will stand up to scrutiny at a later date if you need it.
I was going to tag on there and ask, how would people start the process? How do you go about getting a prenup if we know the cost now?
Yeah.
Do you just reach out to a lawyer, or how would you go about that?
I would always suggest having that discussion first between the two of you and with the family. So if it's the family driving it, you might need to have a chat with mum and dad about, okay, so realistically, what do you want to happen to this money, and how are we going to do that? And there might be some pushback, but we're together and we want to share. But have a discussion about what you each think is fair. And then usually I'd have a client come to me and say, look, we're thinking about it. And I'll say, okay, well, tell me a little bit about yourselves and about your marriage, and have you started discussing it? And they will start to discuss it, and I'll give them some pointers. Okay, you need to think about, how are you going to own the family home? Or if you're thinking about moving abroad, what does that look like? Have you talked about children? And give them some extra topics to talk about. So you begin to build up a blueprint for what you want to do and what you each think is fair. And if somebody wants to maintain their inheritance separately, but the other person has a much larger income, are we going to allow that person to build up some savings from their income during the marriage? So we come to a point of more parity. Some people would say yes, some no, but for different individuals, the answers will be different. But you gradually build up what seems fair to you and a way in which you can start your marriage knowing what you're doing, thinking you know where you're going, but whoever really does. But you have just some good answers about what I need to think about and when. And then once we think they're agreed, then we'd involve another lawyer. They'd have some input, and once we've agreed that, we draft the agreement, which is very long, very long. And then get that signed off.
With that in mind, I'm guessing that you might not be putting strangers on your reading list. I'm not sure how I feel about it. I might wait for the Netflix series, but I would imagine that with Gwyneth Paltrow in it, it might be something that makes you a bit more busy.
Yeah, I think the more people understand prenups, the more people make inquiries. And you know what? I think have that discussion. So not everyone needs a prenup, and a prenup won't work for everyone. There might simply not be enough assets to do anything apart from meet your basic needs, in which case don't waste money on a prenup at this stage. Unless you know something's going to happen in the future. So if you're going to get a big inheritance or things might change, then possibly. But I think have those discussions, be aware. And, if you speak to your friendly lawyer and they think you need one, they'll certainly tell you.
I also feel like this could be a potential discussion point for me and my friends, having some drinks and things. So, because we're really cool and we talk about these kind of things, but it's talking about it with friends as well. But
absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you so much, though, Susie. And now is the time that all our listeners love, and Laura, who also hosts the podcast from time to time, loves. And it's to ask our guest for their financial confession or dilemma.
Okay, so my financial confession might be that I don't have a prenup.
No.
Given the topic that we're talking about. So I don't have one. But we, my husband and I were financially, very similar. I was a divorce lawyer when we got married, so I knew what a divorce might look like. So he wouldn't divorce me. No, but that's not why. In our circumstances, we built and we shared during the marriage, and so the sharing principle at the end of a marriage, we're fine with. We both understand it. It's fine. We don't need to differ from it. So we're happy to roll with the law as it is. But in many circumstances, that's not the case. And there is things that, would point against that being the automatic outcome. So, yes, do as I say, not as I do.
Well, I must confess, I don't have one either. But my husband and I have now been married for almost 22 years. So,
nice.
I think we're sort of edging towards that retirement, although maybe at that point we won't want to spend that much time together, so maybe we should think about it.
Well, we'll see.
Thank you so much for coming to chat to us.
No problem, it's been a pleasure.
And anyone interested in learning more, they've got some great blogs on the Burgess Mee website. You can also connect them on LinkedIn, Facebook and X, and you can connect with us. Don't forget, you can sign up to our newsletter via the Women and Investing Hub on the AJ Bell website. If you pop AJ Bell Money Matters into a search engine, it should take you straight to our page. We're also on Facebook, LinkedIn and Instagram at AJ Bell Money Matters.
The pod is having a short summer break. But Danni, you'll be back in a month, right?
I will. The next episode should drop on the 12th of August. But if you like and subscribe wherever you listen to your pods, you won't miss an episode. And the next pod's going to include a chat with the woman known on socials as Mortgage Free Lee. She's got some great tips on how she became mortgage free so early in her life. So do tune into that. Until then, thank you so much, Jenny.
Thanks for having me on.
And thank you to you both. And thanks all of you for listening.
Before you go, please remember this podcast is for educational purposes, and the views expressed don't necessarily reflect those of AJ Bell. The podcast isn't telling you if a certain investment is suitable or not. Don't forget that the value of investments can change, and you can lose money as well as make it. It's also important to remember that how you're taxed will depend on your individual circumstances, and rules can change. The way an investment performed in the past may not be the same as how it behaves in the future. If you want help, go see a qualified financial advisor.